Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another season preview video here to discuss. We're looking at two more Atlantic Division teams in Detroit and Florida. One of them just missed the playoffs, one of them is the defending Stanley Cup champ now. We're going to look at how these two teams did last year, how they did in the offseason, and how they're gearing up going into this upcoming season. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the video here at the Hockey Channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support when with this. You guys, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. No video comments down in the comment section below, so something else discuss today's video. Now in today's video, we're going to have another season preview video here looking at the Detroit Red Wings and the Florida Panthers. The Panthers are coming off a really good season, but we'll start with the Detroit Red Wings here. First, for the Red Wings, they finished with a record of 41-32-9 for 91 points. They were tied for the last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. They missed it just because they had less regulation wins than the Capitals did, so they were ever so close to ending their playoff drought, and they wind up missing out. So that's really close to ending the playoffs, but they just miss out. They finished 5th in the Atlantic, 9th in the Eastern Conference, and 18th in the NHL, so they weren't too far back of a playoff spot. Finished with 278 goals for, which is actually top 10 in the NHL, 9th in the NHL, so got Patrick Kane in season. Some of the other additions that they made last offseason really thrived. Raymond had a fantastic year, so they had some really good offensive numbers last year. Defensively, the team was atrocious. 274 goals against, tied for 27th lowest in the NHL, so nearly a bottom 5 team in the goals against department. So awful goaltending last year. The goaltending really didn't help them a whole bunch last year. Defense wasn't overly great, so yeah, it was a really bad defense for that team, but a pretty decent offense if you ask me. Point scorers, they had a couple of interesting point scorers. Raymond led the team with 72 points, so they didn't have an 80-plus point player, but 72 is pretty respectable. And then they also had Dylan Larkin, who had 69, and Alex DeBrincat, who had 67. So Raymond, Larkin, DeBrincat all hit over 60 points. And then there were a couple of other guys who hit 60 or close to 60. So they had a couple of really good offensive scorers last year. If you look at their goal scorers, two players had 30-plus goals. That was Larkin and Raymond. Larkin hit 33 goals. Raymond hit 31. DeBrincat also had 27 goals. So those were top 3 in the goal scoring department. Players you'd expect. The rookie scoring leader last year was Simone Edmonton, didn't get into many NHL games, put up a goal, assist, and 2 points, so looked pretty good. I think eventually he's going to be a solid stud defenseman, but still. Interesting note there, Red Wings had a decent season, really good offensively, but they're lacking on defensively, and their tie-breaking procedures wind up having them finish outside the playoffs instead of in, so interesting note there. If you look at their additions and losses from last year, look at their additions, they brought back Patrick Kane, Christian Fischer, and Joe Veleno. Fischer and Kane were UFAs, Veleno was an RFA, so interesting to see them bring back those guys. They currently also brought in Vladimir Tarasenko, and I think it was like a 2-year deal, like just over $4 million. So former Stanley Cup champion just this past year. So that's a pretty good pickup there for the Red Wings. They also had a couple of other lower end forwards in Sheldon Dries, Tyler Mott, and Joe Snively. Dries and Snively should be AHLers, call-up options, while Mott should be a solid addition to their bottom 6. They also had Eric Gustafsson, who's a solid offensive defenseman, should be able to play third pair minutes. And then they also had Jack Campbell and Cam Talbot. Campbell was bought out by Edmonton, should be like the third or fourth stringer there, starting the AHL for the Red Wings, while Talbot's coming off a decent season with the LA Kings and should hopefully help them improve that goaltending core. So interesting additions there. If you look at their losses, they lose David Perron, who goes to Ottawa on a 2-year deal, lose Daniel Sprong, who's a really good bottom 6 addition, to Vancouver, lose Austin Czarnik, who's a UFA right now, and Zach Aston-Reese to Vegas, depth additions there. They also lose Shane Gostisbehere, who's a really good power play maneuverer for them, to Carolina. They lose Jared McIsaac to a UFA status, Ram Shimmick to UFA status, and third stringer James Reimer heads to Buffalo. So they do lose a couple of interesting pieces there. If you look at their trades that this team made during the season, they made 3 trades that weren't pick for pick swaps. First, they traded Andrew Gibson to the Nashville Predators in exchange for Jesse Kiskinen and 2024 second round pick, 53rd overall. So it's not an overly great trade, but to get Kiskinen, who's a decent winger, and a second round pick for Gibson, who was a former second round pick, was a pretty good move there for the Red Wings. And then they made 2 rather baffling moves. They first traded Jake Walman, as well as a 2024 second round pick, 53rd overall, the one they just acquired from Nashville, to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for future considerations. So they didn't get anything back for Walman and had to attach a second round pick, so that was a little bit surprising. And then they also traded Robbie Fabry and their own 2025 4th round pick to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Gage Alexander. No offense to Alexander, but to give up a 4th round pick and Robbie Fabry just to offload his contract is a little bit surprising as well. So the trades were a little bit baffling. To move on for Andrew Gibson, who was a decent right shot defensive prospect is a little bit surprising. Then having to move off of Walman and Fabry and attach draft picks to only get Gage Alexander is really surprising too. So some baffling trades, but interesting to note there that those are the trades that they made. If you look at the top 3 picks from this team for the 2024 draft, they took their first round, 15th overall, had Michael Brandt-Nygaard. He's a solid right winger. Looks like eventually could be a solid second, third line power forward type player. So, and he looks like he's not too far away from making the NHL, so that's a pretty good pickup there. With the second round pick, number 47th overall, they took Max Plant, who's a center. Should eventually be a second, third line center there for the Red Wings. And then the third round, 80th overall, they took a guy in Andre Beecher. Beecher, who's a center as well, should also challenge like a third line center role eventually. So Red Wings had a couple decent draft picks, and they made do with what they had. So interesting pickups there. If we go to 2 biggest questions for the Red Wings for this upcoming season entering training camp, one is the Raymond and Seider deals. Raymond and Seider have not been signed yet, so they need to figure out those contracts before a season starts. Those are going to be huge pieces. If they start a season without Raymond or Seider signed, that could be huge derailment to their season this year. So biggest question in my opinion has to be the contracts for both Raymond and Seider to get signed. And 2, who's in net? They currently have 4 NHL level goaltenders under contract right now, and Alex Lyon, Ville Husso, Cam Talbot, and Jack Campbell. For Talbot, he's probably going to be the 1A. My guess would be Lyon will probably be the 1B. I think they're okay with sending Campbell down minors, so I do wonder what they're going to have to do with Ville Husso or potentially even Alex Lyon. Like, I think they signed Talbot to be a starter, Campbell to play in the AHL. I think they want to have Costa play the AHL level 2, who's their goalie of the future. So with that in mind, I think they really need to figure out, could they potentially move one of Husso or Lyon to go with 3 goaltenders? It'll be interesting to note there, but my biggest questions in my opinion for training camp is 1, the Raymond and Seider contracts, and 2, who's in net? So those are the biggest questions in my opinion entering training camp for this Red Wings team. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Red Wings for this upcoming season. Currently, I have the Red Wings having a lineup of the Brinket on the top line with Larkin and Raymond once he signs, Patrick Kane playing on the second line with JT Compher and Vladimir Tarasenko. I have Michael Rasmussen playing on line 3 with rookie Marco Kasper and Andrew Kopp, and I have line 4 being Tyler Mott, Joseph Valeno, and Christian Fischer. That's a pretty good forward group. Defensively, I have Mata playing with Moritz Seider once he signs. I have Simon Edmonton playing with Jeff Petrie, and I have Eric Gustafsson playing with Justin Hull. I have Talbot being the starter, Lyon being the backup, and my spares currently are Elmer Soderblom, Ben Sherratt, and Ville Husso. And that would be a cap-compliant roster so long as the combined cap hits of Seider and Raymond comes in at around $16.5 million. So that's my current projected lineup for the Red Wings for this upcoming season. Going over to my predictions for the Red Wings for this upcoming 24-25 season. At this point in time, I think the Red Wings are going to be a really good team again this year. I would not be overly surprised if after the season they had last year, they maybe snuck into the playoffs this year, but they did see a lot of other teams. As much as they did do all right, they made a lot of questionable moves. I'm not sure if they got a whole bunch better they did this year than they were last year, so I think they're going to miss the playoffs again just slightly. I have the Red Wings finishing right now with a record of 89 points. That's 2 lower than last year. I have them missing the playoffs by just a mere 3 points, so at this point in time, I don't think the Red Wings are going to do overly bad. It would not be surprising if they stuck into a playoff spot, but I just think with the other teams around them that improved a little bit more than the Red Wings have, I would not be overly shocked if they got close but missed again on the playoffs. So at this point in time, I have them with 89 points, 2 lower than last year, and missing the playoffs by 3 points. That's currently where I think the Red Wings will sit right now. 3 ways this team can improve to get better and more competitive for next year. 1, better goaltending. Last year goaltending did them in. They were low-end goals against teams, so they need to get better goaltending. If they are able to get some solid goaltending from guys like Husso, Lyon, Talbot, I think they could be a really good team, but they need better goaltending. They need to get younger. As much as this team has some younger players like Seider, like Raymond, they are more of an older team, so having guys like Simon Edmonton or Marco Kasper make the team would be smart in my opinion. So I think getting younger is going to be a big thing for the Detroit Red Wings. And lastly is better play from their D. Like we said, as much as the goaltending was bad last year, the defensive play was not overly great. They need guys like Ben Sherratt, Justin Hull, a couple of other guys to step it up a little bit next year. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but 3 ways I can see this team improve is 1, better goaltending, 2, they need to get younger, and 3, better play from the defense will be able to lead the Red Wings, I think, back to the playoffs. So interesting note there. Lastly, going over to my rating for this team for this past offseason. Now, like I said, they made some questionable trades. I'm not sure if the trades of Fabry or the trade of Walman were really ones they won, or even the one of Gibson. They did lose a couple of decent players, like Perron was a really good one, Sprong, Gostisbehere, Reimer was a decent backup last year, lost some depth. Add Talbot and Campbell, add a guy like Gustafsson, add guys like Mott, Tarasenko. So all in all, I don't think they did overly bad. I'm not sure if they got a whole bunch better. If anything, I think they may have gotten a little bit worse. So in my opinion, I'm going to give them a C- C- rating. I think it's warranted for what they did in this offseason. They didn't do too much. They tried to fill their holes with the players that they lost, tried to improve their goaltending situation, tried to improve their forward group a little bit. So I think they did all right, but I don't think they really did a whole bunch. So I think a C- was really warranted for where the Red Wings were this past year. So that's my opinion on the Detroit Red Wings. Going over to the Florida Panthers. Now next up we have the Florida Panthers. This past year was a season to remember, a historic season for the Florida Panthers. First up, they finished with a record of 52, 24, and 6 for 110 points. That was good for first in the Atlantic Division, third in the Eastern Conference, and fifth in the entire NHL. So they were a top 5 team in the regular season. They were really good. Goal scoring wise, this team was really good. 268 goals for 11th in the NHL, so just outside the top 10, but still were a really good goal scoring team. Goals against, though, was far and away the best in the NHL, finishing with 200 goals against, second in the NHL, only next to the Winnipeg Jets. So goals against was fantastic. Bobrovsky and Stolarz were really good last year. While the goal scoring, while it could have been a little bit better, was a pretty good goal scoring team as well. So interesting to note there. Point scoring leaders for the Panthers in the regular season was one, Reinhart, who had 94 points, Tkachuk, who had 88 points, and Barkov, who had 80 points. So they had 3 80-plus point players, including a 90-plus point player in Reinhart. So the were really good offensively with those 3 guys. Goal scoring wise, Reinhart had 57 goals, nearly a 60-goal season for Sam Reinhart. Carter Verhaeghe had 34 goals, and Matthew Tkachuk had 26 goals. So as much as they didn't have a whole bunch of 30-plus goal scorers, to see Reinhart hit 57 was outstanding. So interesting to note there. The rookie scoring leader was Mackie Samoskevich. Only played in a couple of games, didn't have any points, so not really anything to note there, but interesting to note that Samoskevich did get into at least a couple of NHL games. And lastly, we look at how they did this past year. They started in the playoffs as, like we said, the first team in the Atlantic Division, took on the Tampa Bay Lightning in a Florida rivalry, were able to get out to a 3-0 lead in the series, lost game 4, won game 5, won the series in 5, so they advanced to round 2, took on the Boston Bruins, coming off a hard season against the Leafs. They wound up losing game 1, winning the next 3, lost game 5, but then won game 6. So they were a pretty good team in that Bruins series, and they wound up beating them in 6. Then that faced them against the New York Rangers in the conference final. That was a really interesting series. They wound up falling in a 2-1 hole early on in the series, but then won 3 straight and won the series in 6 to advance to the Stanley Cup final for the second time in the last 2 seasons and the third time ever. And then they would get out to a 3-0 lead in the Stanley Cup final, give up 3 straight wins in the Stanley Cup final to tie the series up at 3 with the Edmonton Oilers. And then in game 7, it was a really good performance from the Panthers that led to them winning over the Edmonton Oilers 2-1, winning the series in 7, and them having their first ever time lifting the Stanley Cup. So they were a fantastic team last year, and they wound up being the Stanley Cup champions. So the Panthers had a fantastic playoff run last year. Playoff scoring leaders, Barkov and Tkachuk led the way with 22 points, while in the goal category, Verhaeghe had 11 goals and Reinhart had 10 goals, so really good distribution from the goals and points all over the place. So really good season there from the Panthers to win the Stanley Cup. Now, as you'd expect, teams who win the Stanley Cup aren't able to keep everyone together, so as you look at the additions and losses from this past year, they had a lot of them. Additions, they brought back Sam Reinhart, which was a huge one. Also brought back Anton Lundell, Rasmus Asplund, Dmitry Kuliakov, and Matt Kiersted. So a lot of interesting players that they brought back. Some UFAs, some RFAs. In the free agency, they bring in Tomas Nosek, Mackenzie Entwistle, Jesper Boqvist, AJ Greer, all under $1 million, all on 1 or 2 year deals. All should be challenging for bottom 6 roles on that team this year. They bring in Nate Schmidt, Jason Megna, and Adam Boqvist on the defensive end. Same thing, all under $1 million, all on 1 to 2 year deals, and all should challenge for third pair roles on the Panthers team next year. They also bring Chris Driedger back. He leaves Seattle. They bring him on a 1 year deal. Should be the new third stringer in that system, with Knight now being the backup. So interesting note there. So they definitely made some interesting upgrades. Like, there's a couple of guys out there who I think could be top 9 forwards, maybe even second pair of defensemen, but for the most part, they have a lot of interesting depth pieces on short-term cheap deals. Meanwhile, they lose quite a bit of pieces from their cup run. They lose Tarasenko, who went to Detroit, Kyle Okposo, who's currently UFA, Nick Cousins, who went to Ottawa, Steven Lorentz, who went to Toronto on a PTO, Kevin Stenlund, who went to Utah, Ryan Lomberg, who went to Calgary, Brandon Montour, who went to Seattle, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who went to Toronto, Josh Mahura, who also went to Seattle, Anthony Stolarz, who also went to Toronto, Magnus Hellberg, who went to Dallas, and Matt Guzda, who went to UFA status. So lots of losses. I think they definitely downgraded from what they did last year. Even their team before the trade deadline, I think, was a little bit better than they are right now. So definitely made a lot of losses, but definitely made a lot of additions too. They made no trades this offseason that weren't pick-for-pick swaps, so no things to talk about there. If we look at their top 3 picks from this past year draft, they took Linus Eriksson, who's a center in the second round, 58th overall, should eventually be challenging for like a third, maybe fourth line role on this 4 group. They also took in the 3rd round, 97th overall, Matt Shervin, who's a left shot defenseman, could eventually be challenging for like a 3rd, maybe 2nd pair role. And they take Simon Zethers in the 4th round, 129th overall, another center prospect who could challenge for a 3rd, 4th line role eventually. So interesting note there. If we look at the 2 biggest questions, in my opinion, entering training camp for the Panthers, it's 1, can Knight be the backup again? 2 years ago, he went to the NHL Players Assistance Program, stayed there for a while. Last year was basically a consistent AHL goaltender, with Stolarz playing really well, and with Bobrovsky playing really well. They didn't really need him. But now Stolarz is gone, Knight's probably going to be a backup again. So after his long journey through the NHL Players Assistance Program, back through AHL, can he be a solid backup goaltender again? I think it's probably likely. On top of that, who will be in the bottom 6 next year? Like we said, they made a lot of interesting changes when it comes to the free agent market with their additions and losses. Like they added Nosek, Entwistle, Greer, Boqvist. Any of those guys want to make in the bottom 6? Is there a couple of younger guys like a Samoskevich or a Sourdiff who could potentially make as like a bottom 6 forward? Definitely. I think there's going to be some bigger questions there for the Panthers. But in my opinion, the 2 biggest questions are, can Knight be the backup again? And who will be in the bottom 6 for the Panthers for the upcoming season? Those are my 2 biggest questions entering training camp. Next, going over to my projected lineup for this team for this upcoming season. If you look at my lineup, I have Verhaeghe playing on the top line with Barkov and Reinhardt. I have Evan Rodriguez playing on the second line with Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk. I have Eetu Luostarinen playing on line 3 with Anton Lundell and Maki Samoskevich. And I have Nosek centering Boqvist and Greer on line 4. Currently, I have on the defensive end Nate Schmidt playing with Aaron Ekblad on the top pair, Forsling and Boqvist on line 2, and Mikkola and Kuliakov being the 3rd pair. I have Bobrovsky starting the season as the starter, Knight as the backup, and I have Gadjevich and Bjornfoot being the 2 spares for the Panthers for this upcoming season. That would be a cap compliant roster, so interesting note there, but that's my current lineup for the Panthers for this upcoming season. If you look at my prediction for the Panthers for this upcoming season, I think they're still going to be a good team. Most of the team is back, but they did lose a couple of really good pieces, so I do think they're going to take a small step back. I don't think they're going to be in a wild card spot. I don't think they're even going to fall beyond the triple-digit mark. I currently have them finishing with 104 points. That's 6 lower than last year. I have them finishing 2nd in the Atlantic Division, which isn't too much of a drop-off from where they were last year, so I think they're going to be another solid team. Could they have another early exit in the 1st round or 2nd round? I think it's possible. We've seen the last few Cup winners battle in the 1st round the year after, so it's quite possible the Panthers could wind up losing early on in the playoffs. So I do expect them to make the playoffs. I expect them to be a top 3 team in the Atlantic Division. I expect them to hit 104 points, 6 lower than what they were last year. So that's my opinion on the Panthers at this point in time. 3 ways I think this team can improve to get better for next year. 1, better bottom 6 scoring. As much as their team was really good offensively last year and led by those top end players, their bottom 6 was a little bit lacking, especially in the regular season. So if they can have some more bottom 6 scoring, I think they can improve. They need solid play from Knight, like we just said. But in the AHL, the Players Assistance Program, they need solid play from Knight, sort of like what they got from Stolarz last year if they're going to have a replicated season. So that's another thing. And they need to replicate their solid D from last year. Like we said, they lost a couple of pieces. Montour's not there anymore, neither is OEL. So can the additions of guys like Boqvist, Schmidt, and Megna sort of offset that and keep them having some solid D play? I think it's another thing that's going to have to watch out for. So in my opinion, 3 ways this team can improve is 1, better bottom 6 scoring, 2, solid play from Knight, and 3, replicate the solid D from last year. And lastly, going over to my off-season ranking. Now, they didn't make any trades. As much as they did pick up a couple of decent players like Entwistle, Greer, Schmidt, Boqvist, Nosek, they did lose a couple of key pieces that were huge in that cup run, like Tarasenko, Okposo, Lawrence at sometimes, Lomberg, Montour, OEL on the defensive end, Stolarz and net. So they did lose quite a bit of players. So I'm going to give them a D+. I don't think they had an awful off season, especially given the fact they just won the cup, but given all the subtractions that they made and all the smaller lower end players that they had to take on to fill the holes, I think this team having a D+ rating is warranted for how they went about doing the off season stuff. So interesting note there, but that's my opinion on the Florida Panthers and the Detroit Red Wings. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about the seasons they just had this past year with the Red Wings just missing and the Panthers winning the cup? What do you think about their off seasons? Did they have good off seasons? Did they have bad off seasons? And would you agree with my predictions for the lineup or the predictions for this upcoming season? Do you think Florida will still be a top 3 team? And do you think Detroit will miss yet again? Definitely leave your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So on top of it for today, I'm going to like this video. If you're liking, subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. We're now with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below. So I'll discuss today's video. Also a blog to about news, rumors, analysis. If that's so check that out. Leave a link down in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.